Hey, it's Crumbs. You're lost? How do you not know where you are? It's Thorin's channel.
When you look at the state of competitive Overwatch, particularly obviously the top league in the world is the Overwatch League, which features many Koreans, it might be easy to imagine that Overwatch is about as Korean as you can get in terms of an esports game. If you're going to pick out esports at the moment that are big esports, that Koreans dominate or are among the best in, who have the best region, produce the most talent, the most teams that are good, you'd obviously pick Overwatch as one of them. It'd go along with League of Legends. Go along with in the past StarCraft and games like that. You obviously think about the Korean creep, where more and more Korean players came over as Season 1 was going on, as Season 2's come along. We've had entire expansion teams that are pretty much all Korean. Obviously, star players pretty much were Korean in the Overwatch League by the end. Even teams that started out with no Korean players, like the Florida Mayhem, ended up with a very good Korean player carrying them, Messiah player. You look at the fact that the Overwatch World Cup is won by Korea each time. The Overwatch League was won by Korean teams. It might seem like, hey, Korea seems that they're fully going in this thing, right? The engine's absolutely revved up. They've been up to 5th gear. You know, we've seen what Korea can do in this game, but it's actually not as simple as that. I would actually make an argument that actually, if Overwatch ends up being a really big esport for many years, one of those games that can get a solid half a decade, maybe more under its belt with big top-level competitions, and is considered a major esport for years to come, yet doesn't have the real mechanism, the machine of the Korean esports industry involved in it, impacting it directly, it will be very unique in that sense, actually. There has never been a major esports game over the last 5 or 6 years that had Koreans be legitimately among the best in it, but didn't have the industry behind it, didn't have KeSPA, didn't have the Korean Esports Association, and the teams that are a part of that, SK Telecom, Jin Air, KT Rolster, Samsung Galaxy in the past. We know the teams and the famous ones if you've ever followed League of Legends or StarCraft, etc. Games like Counter-Strike, games like Dota 2, these are things that those games missed. They had the occasional Korean team or players who could be good, but they were the exception to the rule. KeSPA never fully embraced those games. The distribution methods and publication methods in Korea weren't sufficient to make those games have a chance to pop off. They didn't have the social phenomenon component where they snowball and become viral and you see the ads on trains and kids are playing it everywhere in the PC bangs. That never happened with those games, and as a result, Korea was not as big an impact, did not have as big an impact in those games as it did in League of Legends, StarCraft 2 and other such games. Now, if you think back in history, okay, we already had a massive increase in the impact of Koreans in Overwatch. Like, initially, when the Overwatch scene launched, and we were in 2016, and we were playing the first tournaments, and the best teams initially were the Westerners, obviously, a lot of people wondered how Koreans would do in Overwatch. I mean, there was the famous thing where people claimed that they weren't going to be good at FPS games, because they didn't understand some of the history of Quake and Counter-Strike. They're very good players there. Now, the bizarre thing about that is, yeah, early on, there was a point to that. Early on, obviously, the best teams were the Western teams. I mean, you had the Envious squad at the very beginning online. Then you had the likes of Rogue. You had Misfits, these quality teams. You looked at the first tournament, okay, early on in the first tournaments, yeah, you had Lunatic Eye did well in the APAC tournament, and yeah, the Koreans won the Overwatch World Cup the first time around, and yeah, a bunch of Korean teams, even in the first Apex, were making the round of 8, and then two of them made the round of 4, and one obviously made the final, where it was a Korean team versus Envious, who won the tournament, and you know what, yeah, you still had, even after that, Envious and Rogue, teams who absolutely could compete with the Koreans, who were very, very good, even individually looked just as good. In fact, famously, because of the strength of the likes of Lunatic Eye, people used to say, oh, maybe Korea's just better. Again, not that good at FPS games. Maybe it's not about mechanical players with them, it's more about they've got the smart shot callers and supportive elements and tanks. But, you know, the West has got Soon, and it's got the Tavik, it's got the DPS players are going to be the Westerners, the mechanical players, obviously ignoring aspects like Nano Hana and some of the other incredible players that were out there. But as a trend, that was the way people were going. But you saw when the Overwatch League World Cup came along, we'd already had many seasons of Apex that have been dominated by the Korean teams. In fact, the Western teams tended to underperform there for what people expected. It wasn't this big clash that you thought. By the time you got to the Overwatch League, it was already looking worse and worse for Western teams. Yeah, okay, you had the Outlaws, the Houston Outlaws, who were the all-Western team, and over the first few stages, yeah, they could compete. They could go head-to-head with some of these Korean teams. It was their meta, sure, but they were able to compete considering they didn't have any Koreans. You had the Philadelphia Fusion come on strong as the stages went on. That that was mainly European players, with a few Korean players mixed in there, obviously a guy from Israel. The Uprising obviously had many non-Korean players and was a team that was able to, at one point in time, go undefeated throughout a stage until we got to the stage playoffs. So, even so, they were carried by Striker and Gamso, I have to say. After KeSPA was eliminated from the equation, it was very much about the Koreans. But you look by the end of the Overwatch League, okay, so Spitfire won the league, all Korean, obviously famously made up of two of the best Korean teams. Yes, they had their troubles, but they won the stage in the end and won a stage and won the overall season. The NYXL dominated the season, was the best team of the year overall, obviously all Korean. Runaway, they came in as a team that was very hot in Korea and they got picked up entirely pretty much by an expansion slot. That was the Vancouver Titans new lineup. The O2 Ardent guys were one of the better contenders teams throughout Contenders Korea. They've obviously now gone mainly into the Toronto Defiant. The funny thing is, though, Korea still hasn't fully embraced Overwatch as a game. It has as a casual game, but the industry hasn't gotten behind it. It hasn't gotten behind it in the context that it did in StarCraft Brood 1. It did in League of Legends. KeSPA has never fully arrived in Overwatch, and seemingly now, it probably never will. Because of the fact that the Korean Contenders, which is the top league there, can never be anything but a feeder league, a second league for Overwatch League. Seemingly, the Korean esports industry doesn't want to get the outside investment or have their big sponsors shell out the money it costs to get a spot in the Overwatch League. They're trying to, if they build something, Korea is a very insular region. They want to build something in Korea. If a Korean sponsor like SK Telecom, KT Rolter sponsors something, it doesn't make much sense to sponsor a team in the Overwatch League when your country that you have your service in, these telecom providers, is in Korea. You want to sponsor something Korean and something Korean made if possible, even if that's an aspect. So it doesn't look as though we'll ever have them, but this is significant because you look at games like StarCraft 2, League of Legends, early on, as far as Korean involvement in these games were gone, yeah, they had some of the best teams and players in the world and they were very competitive, but you saw as soon as KeSPA got involved in both games, it completely shut down for non-Koreans. That's when Korea got really serious. That's when you saw the level, the player base, the coaching, the infrastructure all take place to make the Korean scene so much stronger, so much significantly better, and so much more professional in its approach. In StarCraft 2, that was in 2012. All of a sudden after that, many of the GSL champions, many of the top players, all the ex-KeSPA players, not the non-KeSPA players who made their name early on in StarCraft 2, they were left by the wayside large and large. You go to League of Legends, it was 2013 when these teams really kicked into gear in terms of KeSPA getting squads. What do you know? Within months, they already got the best teams. They were CG Entus. They were in the finals. They were Blaze, Frost, the best teams in Korea. KT Rolster and SK Telecom, within a couple of splits, had already taken over as the clear best teams, the dominant teams, the ones that built, in terms of SK Telecom, a dynasty. KT Rolster, always excellent within the league. You had likes of Jin Air coming along. The level went up in all respects. So you have to ask yourself, well, what do KeSPA teams bring? What does an organization bring? Because, you know, the same player could play for someone else or could play in a league elsewhere, could play abroad, right? This is the point. They bring a better infrastructure setup. They have team houses from day one, or better team house setups than many of the amateur teams do, including a number of teams that are in Contenders Korea at the moment who might look like they have all the accoutrements that a professional team should have, but it's not on the level of what a Samsung and SK Telecom can provide you. They bring coaching, and not just coaching as in we hire coaches and we have people from the game and the community, but crucially, they bring in, yes, analysts, strategical coaches who know the game and come from the community. Those people already can be gotten by any team in Korea right now in Overwatch. But it's when they come in, they keep head coaches that might have a history in StarCraft, in League of Legends, going back in the org. And they have a level of superiority. Yeah, they have a superior position, a level of authority that comes with them, respect, because of the tradition that they carry within their org, the standards that they've set, and they can really set the culture of a team. And that is actually very, very significant because the head coach in many Korean teams doesn't coach in the traditional sense of like inside the game. He's not an X's and O's guy. He's more about setting the team culture and setting discipline and curfews and making sure people don't get out of line and have big egos and come into a team and be very, very sick and therefore just fuck around and not practice properly. This is the guy who can establish that component, and that's why the level of play that is produced by the KeSPA teams has been so historically excellent. So you look at some other teams, they can bring in a guy who says, this is my team, or I know how to coach you inside the game. He might not necessarily be able to manage people in the same way. He might not automatically carry that respect, that tradition with him. You look at how Korean teams over the years from KeSPA have roster built. You look at some of the squads in Apex, that was what to me just cried out for KeSPA teams, because when you saw teams like famously Lunatic High, everyone always used to say, why don't they ever upgrade the DPS players? Kongdu Panthera had all these strong individual players, could never get it done in the playoffs till the end of Apex. Africa Blue had a couple of good players, they really mismanaged how even those were used. Like, these were teams which should have been chopped and changed. These were teams which should have been trying more rookies out, not keeping players who were clearly not good enough to make it at the top level, swapping around players between the teams. That's fair enough. People like Kongdu Panthera, I guess, did do that, and with Panthera and Uncia or whatever it was called, the other team, trying to find the right mix. KeSPA teams very on point about that. They really know about giving people chances, but not too many chances, and they cut you early rather than cut you late. They don't wait on that sense. You don't get wasted teams like the luxury watch teams who just blew all the talent they had until the Overwatch League began, and funnily enough, obviously didn't even win that when they became NYXL, right? Also, you add in Korean teams with their infrastructure from KeSPA. They've been amazing historically at scouting new talent, at knowing people in solo queue, people out there who just are no-namers, just practice partners, guys out there who are on B teams and low-level competitive. They know their scene because they know the Korean esports scene, and word gets to them. They get told things by people, so that if talent's there, talent will rise through the scene. You look at the Overwatch League situation at the moment, a lot of this now has to do with what your value is to Western players. How well are you doing the contenders' career as to whether you're going to make it? Whether you know some Korean player who can recommend you. That's not the same as the team scouting you, bringing you in for a tryout, having you as a practice partner, and then deciding it's time for you to play in the team. KeSPA obviously also brings along with it some of the biggest companies in Korea, a level of resources, sponsorship, marketing opportunities you simply cannot get elsewhere. Teams like Element Mystic, you look at Runaway, these aren't famous names. These don't have massive backing in the same way as SK Telecom does, KT Rosa. These are the biggest telecoms companies in Korea, household names. You go to Incheon Airport, you're going to see these companies everywhere. You're going to see adverts for them all over the place. At the moment, you look at people like Lunatic High, Kongdu Panthera. Okay, I've heard of Lunatic High as an org. They were a little unknown org for many years who have a history a long time ago in Counter-Strike. You will not get the same level of support and tenure in Korean esports if you don't have some of these companies involved. Will Overwatch be sick without KeSPA? Will it ever reach its full potential in terms of these Korean players in the Korean scene? That's why I say it'll be very unique. If it can do it, I'll tip my hat to it. Well done, amazing. It's already had an interesting approach already because, as I say, there's been a lot of success without KeSPA. I just feel as though if you're going to bypass an entire industry, you're missing out on some of the best coaching staff. You're missing out on some of the best scouts. You're missing out on people who will make sponsors within Korea be interested in Overwatch and therefore keep the Korean scene nice and healthy. If the Korean scene is just going to be a farm league for the West, it's going to be stuck at a very stunted level. It might have amazing players, but they won't make very much money in Korea. There won't be as many opportunities for people to go pro in Korea, to keep playing, to not make it, but then be at a lower level and just play in Korea contenders and hopefully have a career. Obviously the word Korea and career as in like your job, unfortunately are too similar, and that makes that quite a complicated sentence to say in that respect. So I will say there are negatives that come with KeSPA as well. Like the fact that it's so insular, well, they're used to running the game. Like when they take over a game like League of Legends, StarCraft, whatever in the Korean region, they're a little bit mafia-like at times. Like, it's their scene. They run it. They decide the rules. They can do things that you might consider unfair. Like, famously, this thing in Korean Brood War where if you had to type PP to ask for a pause. It meant pause, please, in the game if a problem happened. Well, famously, a player typed it 3 times and pressed, like, say, world say in the game and actually had to forfeit the game, even though any normal person would do like the King Solomon, you know, the idea of like judging someone and going, right, well, you know, in the spirit of the law, like that's unfair, even though the letter of the law might say this. You'd obviously say, well, he's obviously just trying to pause the game there, isn't he? So we're not going to punish him for that. No, they were sticklers for rules in that sense, and the player was punished for it. So there have been a number of negative aspects to KeSPA, some of the things they've done with broadcast rights there. I'm not arguing in favour of that. I'll saying it's an overwhelmingly good thing universally, but generally it has been the method by which the best that teams and players have been found, coached, brought to the top level, how excellence has been fostered and propagated throughout esports from the Korean scene in games that had this component. So without having it, we've never had another system in Korea that's been able to produce excellence to that degree. So I'm certainly interested to see what will happen in Overwatch, but at the moment I feel like people actually are jumping the gun and thinking that we've already seen the development over there and now it's just about the Overwatch League. In theory, it hasn't even gotten really started in Korea in terms of what traditionally took teams and players to the top of the global scene in esports. This video was kindly supported by Dean Tanglis, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, Gardner Wilson, OllieJ, Tobias Bernasconi, NateDOhDoubleG, James Harding, Kyla Harris, Travis Greb, Daniel Yordanov, Tristan Jones, and a special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for upcoming content of mine? Perhaps you'd like to ask me a question for my monthly video AMA. Do you want some teasers to see who the next guests are for my talk shows, for my interviews? Maybe you'd like to take part in a monthly esports discussion with yours truly. Well, put your money where your mouth is at the Patreon link in the description box below and join the Scrilluminati today.